Hello and welcome. This is Born to Flourish. I'm Anna Clint, transformational coach and spiritual guide, and I am totally thrilled to be here today with my pal and colleague and amazing, incredible woman, Leannah Lumauig. And she is a life coach for marginalized communities, especially women of color. And she works with women on relationships, business, and personal life amazingness. And she's just incredible. And welcome, Leannah. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Anna. I'm happy to be here with you.
Yay. So spoiler alert, we don't have a script and we are going to go into wherever we want to go, but with the overarching theme of race identity and spiritual awakening, just a small, tiny theme of race identity and spiritual awakening. And so let's start by this, like 2020, right? It was the year of like epic vision, like epic, peeling the wool off of our eyes in terms of who we have been in the world, how we have been, and is it okay and right and just, and all of these things. We all, unless you were in a cave for all of 2020, like we all came front and center with issues around race, be it our own or our perceptions of race, or regarding other people, and it was at times for privileged communities. I'm a white passing person of mixed race, but I am a white person. But for privileged communities, it was oftentimes like really, really uncomfortable. I'm curious, as a woman of color, like what was that racial reckoning like for you last year and into this year even?
Okay, so I think we're talking about what happened in around May, June of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and there was a huge movement in the Black Lives Matter movement, and also just the topic of racism in general.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was a mixture of so many different things because I grew up in the Bay Area. It's very, very diverse. And walking around, you see people who look like you, who look different. It's just a melting pot of so many different races.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, in the workplace, for me, I worked in corporate, I worked in technology, and it was not as diverse. I was oftentimes the only woman on my team, the only person of color, the only woman of color, even in the building, especially when I lived in Utah for a couple of years.
Yeah, I bet.
So I had experienced microaggressions and racism in ways that I didn't have a name for. I would do my work. I would put in even more hours than some of my coworkers and still feel like things were off or not right. I would get passed up for promotions for people who just like came in out of left field. And after I've been working on something for so long, and I was just like, what is going on? What is happening? On paper, it seems like I'm doing the right thing, but in my heart, I don't feel like there's something right about what I'm experiencing.
Yeah.
So when, the movement happened and there were names for all of these things that I was experiencing, I was a mixture of emotions of like relief, like, wow, I'm not alone. There's a name for this, like microaggressions is something that I had learned. And it's not just towards people of color, but it's also for women in general.
Totally.
And other marginalized groups, like people who with different sexual orientations and disabilities and everything. And I was also angry because of realizing what had happened to me and realizing the injustice that was happening. And so a mixture of all of these different things, I felt connected. Even though I was living in Bali at the time, I was very much connected to the community that was pushing this forward, especially in America. So lots of resonant feelings.
Sure. Yeah, sure. And I'm curious, because we want to talk about identity. Before we hit record on a previous conversation, we were discussing like how your own perception of yourself has been evolving of late in terms of identifying the way that you do and the choices that you make, and even the people that you are, that are potentially now gravitating to work with you. Identity is something that's so fascinating for me because we all get wrapped up into different identities, and some that really serve us and some that don't. And it is this evolutionary process. And I'm curious how that has been unfolding for you.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So I identify as a Filipino American woman. My parents are immigrants from the Philippines, and they migrated over as teenagers, met here, got married, started a family at 19, no college degree. So they had to really hustle in order for us to survive and thrive.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very lucky that my parents put in all the love and effort that they did for us, for my brother and I, to be able to have the opportunities and privileges that we do have. Growing up, I was very close to Filipino culture because my parents spoke Tagalog in the household. We watched a lot of Filipino movies and TV shows. But as I started to become an adult and start working, that's when I kind of shifted away from identifying so much with my Filipino culture, probably because of the influence of where I lived in America, right? The average CEO of a Fortune 500 company is a white male who's 6 feet tall. Right. And for me, I started working in corporate America. I'm 5 feet tall. I'm very brown, and I'm a woman and a woman of color. Right. So seeing that and not seeing anyone who looked like me, not anyone I could see myself in this leadership role, like I guess subconsciously moved away from my culture, from my background, and identifying as someone who was Filipino. Yeah. And I didn't know that was happening until I started to, I guess, see, like, until I actually quit corporate America 6 years ago.
That's so powerful. It's this insidious, like, little, like, slice at a time that's like chiseling away at your self-esteem, at your worthiness, because you're so different from that corporate norm. Yeah, that it's that, that slippery slope, or the pot of boiling water that the frog doesn't know that they're in till it's actually boiling. And that's it's really reminding me, when this is totally like off topic almost, but one thing my dad always said to me when I was a teenager is, you are who you hang out with. And you're kind of illustrating this, like, this is the bulk. I mean, the bulk of your waking hours were spent in a culture that was so foreign from the culture that you identified with. And so tell me about, and you write about this really beautifully in your newsletters, about some of those experiences, but for people who are new to you, like, tell us what was that looking like when you were in that corporate place, like trying to fit into something that was not meant for you at all?
Oh, yeah. I would be in the office, and I would look over at some of my coworkers who were white men, and some of them were more junior in their position, but they would feel so relaxed to the point where they could put their feet up literally on the desk.
Yeah, totally.
Right? Like, yeah. Kick back, and like
swagger.
The swagger. And and I remember, like, they would also, like, mansplain to me certain concepts and certain things. And in my mind, I'm like, what? Like, what's going on here? And I didn't have the name for it. And I also didn't have, like, I would obviously now respond differently to it. But at the time, I just took it. And because that's the behavior that not just women of color, but women in the workplace would choose. Right. And that's just a normal response. I would be ignored in meetings and accept that too. I would be interrupted. I would be passed up. I would be bullied in the workplace. And like cry to my dad on the phone when I was really young and not knowing why
Right.
I was targeted.
Right.
And it was so painful for me emotionally. And because your livelihood depends on your success at work, and your success at work depends on, how you are perceived, especially in corporate. It was so confusing to me because I was a straight A student, extracurricular activities, doing the most, which is also, what a lot of my clients who are, women of color, they overperform.
Right.
Do to survive and to be considered as equal.
Right. Totally. Oh my goodness. And then tell me about the internal stuff, like the crying to your, because like what I'm sensing is also like, was there this need to be perfect?
Mhm.
Like, so striving for perfection and beating yourself up and being self-critical and
yeah, a lot of that was internalized, right? Like there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And this is what's happening in my external world. It's not adding up. It doesn't make sense. So there must be something within me that I need to fix.
Right.
I need to be better. So I needed to go and look as best as I could. So I would do my hair and makeup and wear heels, and to the point where I went to a podiatrist and a foot doctor, and they were like, you're going to need surgery if you keep wearing heels. And I just kept wearing them because I felt like I was taller and more authoritative, and I just did all of these extra things, and put in a lot more effort and tried to force success for a decade.
Yeah. Wow. I'm just thinking of all the foot pain involved in that decade. It's awful. And that's just the tiniest part. All of that internal pain, all of that heartache, all of that confusion of like, why is it like this? What's wrong with me? And all of the self-doubt. And it's heartbreaking. And, since we want to like touch on also spiritual awakening, which I know you're a life coach, and, but I just see, like, I want to know about this awakening. Like, how did you get out of corporate, and where did that lead you? And we'll just flow into awakening because it's a process. It's a cascade. Absolutely. It's not a one and done.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So after almost 10 years of working in corporate and kind of going through the rinse, lather, repeat cycle of getting a new job, thinking, okay, this must be it. Okay, no, that's not it. Let's move into a new role. Let's go move from like HR into sales. Okay, no, that's not it. Let's move to Utah. Let's move to a new company. So I kept trying to find my place and I never found it. And then I realized, you know what? Like, I don't think I'm ever going to find it in corporate because I've tried. I've moved. I've done all of these things and I still feel broken. I feel like there's something wrong with me. I'm the common denominator.
Right.
And so I started seeking out my own coaching. I said, well, maybe it's just not corporate at all. So I had this intuition. I knew that I wanted to kind of go into coaching, but I needed the permission. I always need permission.
Because you're such a good girl.
I'm a good girl, so I'm going to get permission first.
Yeah.
And so, my first coach was an older white male. There wasn't a lot.
Mine was too. It was not the best fit.
Right. I mean, granted, he helped me.
Yes.
And I then started moving in the direction of becoming a life coach. I started reading books. I started meditating. I started really diving into the spiritual and personal growth world, to where I was becoming more self-aware of what was going on internally and externally. So I started spending a lot more time alone. And I also started dabbling in new hobbies that I thought were interesting, but maybe never gave myself the time to do it. I started doing a lot more things like traveling alone and eating at restaurants alone, which I thought I was terrified of doing before. So I
Yeah.
started becoming my friend, my best friend.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And that led me uh, towards like deeper into my coaching journey and eventually um, moving to Bali and staying there for 6 years, where I still currently live.
Yeah, which is amazing. Oh my goodness. All right. So tell me more though about the awakening part. Tell me about
Yes.
this, like when your eyes finally like were open to the injustice of that system that you were in, and like how does that relate to the journey that you've been on up until this point?
Yeah, like when you ask that question, I'm like, it's
Mhm.
definitely a charged topic for me. And I'm still
Mhm.
really trying to process because it's still fairly new for me.
Yeah.
Um, I hired a therapist to help me speak with an ex partner that I
Mm,
was with at the time because I was having trouble articulating without being charged, without
right. Right.
um, and also without being defensive because he couldn't understand. He was a white male,
Mhm.
and also in a way that, um, but it was difficult for him to understand and speak to me because he didn't have a lot of like anti-racist education as well. So
Right.
he had a lot of biases too, which was really triggering for me.
Mhm.
So that was
Mhm.
part of it, like where I was like, okay, there's something uh again, there's something wrong with me. So I need to go pay a professional to help me protect someone else's ego because
Right.
I can't stop them from wounding or re-triggering me.
Right.
So I need to go find some help.
Right.
That relationship ended
Mhm.
especially after me realizing that this race and who I am as a woman of color is a huge part of my identity. And um, I need a partner who understands how important that is for me,
Sure.
um, and to support me in this journey of healing and
Mhm.
really getting to know myself in that area.
Yeah. That's powerful. That's really powerful. And you're really touching on something that's so, so potent. And I feel like I'm going to talk messy through this, but what you're touching on is something that I don't feel we got all the way through with 2020 is in some, we touched on it in a lot of different ways, but what I'm hearing you say is that you internalize these biases by being in that corporate world that was essentially perpetuating racism.
Mhm.
And whether it's intentional or unintentional, it doesn't matter. That's what it's doing. And also, of course, misogyny, and we can get into all of those other things.
Yes.
But your experience in that, you internalized it, and then it was mirrored back to you in this partnership that was let's call it an unenlightened partnership, because this other person didn't have the ability to see you in a different kind of way. And because you had also internalized those aspects of, let's say, white supremacy or male white supremacy, that there was an integral wounding to your own personhood, that and that was the retriggering. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah.
And so and then when we zoom out and we really look at culture and awakening and culture shifting, this is magnified, right? Because all of us, no matter what our skin color, no matter what our gender at birth or now, it doesn't matter. Like we've all internalized these ideas that 6-foot white men like are the ones who hold the power.
Yeah.
And of course, we all know many, many 6-foot white men who are wonderful people. And we're not saying that every single one is a racist. We're not
Right.
saying that. But we're talking about and enculturation of ideologies that are not supportive of you personally, Leannah, as a woman of color in your own personal experience. And this is where like it's becomes really fascinating, as when we talk about the awakening of humanity, is that this is an integral part of it, is who have we been? And we've been this way because we've been acculturated, we've been indoctrinated, we've been inoculated with these ideas by people who probably had all the best intentions.
Yep.
But it doesn't change the fact that as a global humanity, you know, the human race, we have to still do this very nuanced, very interesting, very difficult, and very challenging and triggering work of really coming to terms with that. And I'm just curious, like so in some ways, like there's this, like with my clients, I'm always working with like radical acceptance. You accept what is, no matter what. We accept that corporate America is this way, no matter what. We accept that when we were in that situation, we were indoctrinated with those ideas, and it did cause us to feel terrible self-doubt, confusion, whatever, perfectionism, whatever the thing is for each one of us. And it doesn't, we all have our own version of corporate America in our life. And so, this idea of radical acceptance, how has that played in for you in terms of like being able to come to a healing juncture and to come to a new level of embracing your own identity, as well as furthering your own spiritual awakening? That's like a 10-mile long question. I apologize.
That's fine. Right. Yes.
So self-acceptance, how has that just rippled out for you in this?
Yeah. So I guess like when you were asking, like one thing I was thinking about was like accepting kind of what is. And part of me is aware and observant and tolerant of the climate of today. At the same time, I don't want to accept it. And that's part of the reason why I do what I do, and why I serve who I serve.
Right.
And there's more to come, as this is still kind of a fairly new thing for me. So I'm still learning every day about how to serve better. But as far as for myself, like accepting who I am physically, but also how it impacts who I am as process of, I guess, coming to terms of what happened, how I show up.
Hang on, right? Because we froze on my end, so I'm assuming that the video froze. So just repeat back a little bit in terms, you were just saying now in terms of accepting myself and who I am. Go back into that thread, please.
Yeah, so I'm in the process of learning to accept myself and who I am as a whole person, and how like my race and gender and impacts my whole identity and how I see myself. I feel like a baby deer learning how to walk. And I can see what's ahead, and I conceive myself in a more empowered position, in a more, educated and informed, but also owning, fully owning my identity and my whole story and journey. And right now, like learning how to do it right now, it still feels a little wobbly. So it's kind of an up and down, everyday experience, right? Some days I'm angry, and some days I'm like owning it, and some days I'm confused.
Right.
So that's today.
Yeah.
But totally. Even just talking with you today about it is way further along than where I had been. Like that's awesome. Couldn't even write about it to myself in my journal in the past. So this is definitely progress for me.
Oh, that's awesome.
Thank
When
you.
I hear you talk about this baby deer image or metaphor, when it makes me smile because baby deer are adorable, but it's so indicative of what my spiritual awakening process has been like. And so many people that I know, it's like, sometimes it's so uncomfortable and like you come through it and you feel like you have sea legs and you just can't like, where is the ground? Which way is up? Which way is down? And it's just, I just see it as really as part of the process, although it can be so uncomfortable and confusing at times and destabilizing. But what I'm hearing and just like really sensing and want to honor and mirror back to you is that this journey is still so rich and has yet to inform your work in even more potent and radical ways than it has to this point, which just gives me chills to think about like all of the power that is coming to you from these experiences as you start to really what I call like mine the gold of those, difficult times. And even, as you just process things like with your ex, it's really potent, powerful stuff. I feel so honored that you shared yourself with us in this way. Like, this is really incredible. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to do it and articulate,
Mhm.
some of my feelings and thoughts around this journey.
Yeah, well, it's an honor to be able to receive it, right? It's like each one of us had, no matter what, how we identify, like every single one of us had a really intense experience over the last, year and a half to 2 years. And I do really believe that humanity is in this massive awakening process, which is really uncomfortable. There's a lot of strife and discord, and people don't like change. And yet, like, you're really demonstrating like how to show up for this, right? It's like you've enlisted support. You have a spiritual practice, you're, a meditation practice. You've chosen where you live very carefully so that it, like, I believe it supports you at a really deep level. And now it sounds like you also have a personal partner that you've called in that's really supporting you at this deep level. So it just really shows like like how a person can bring together levels of support for themselves that I think is beautiful modeling for your clients, for my clients, for me, for everybody watching. So I just really appreciate that. And I just want to thank you so much. I've just enjoyed every minute of this.
Thank you.
And
Likewise.
yeah. And so just tell us a little bit about how people can get in touch with you, follow you. I know you have a beautiful podcast and a beautiful newsletter, but what do you prefer people find you if they want to find you?
You can visit my website,
Which we'll link to. Yeah,
leannalumauig.com.
great.
And I also have Instagram as well at Leannah Lumauig. And you can find all the information on my podcast there. It's called the Undercurrent Podcast.
That's right, because you're a surfer.
Yes.
That's so wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Leannah. And I hope we'll get a chance to do this again and just like drill down even deeper as we both evolve on our journeys. I just so appreciate you.
Thank you. I'd love that. Thanks for having me.